You think procrastination is a problem of discipline, but it's not. It's a problem of biology. You aren't waiting because you're weak. You're waiting because your brain was built to protect you, not to push you. It's not broken. It's doing its job. Procrastination is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is not failure of will. It is a biological response deeply rooted in the architecture of your nervous system, one that interprets effort and uncertainty as potential threats and responds by downshifting the system into a state of inaction. When you procrastinate, it's because your brain is trying to protect you from failure, from discomfort, from emotional exposure. It activates the same defensive networks that would have once helped you survive in a hostile environment. And while that mechanism served a powerful purpose in evolutionary history, today it misfires in response to a blank screen, a deadline, a difficult conversation, or the weight of expectation. The brain doesn't know the difference between emotional friction and physical danger. It responds to both with retreat unless it's retrained otherwise. The amygdala, one of the brain's key threat detectors, lights up when you perceive a task as overwhelming, uncertain, or likely to cause pain, emotional or reputational. That signal spreads fast, triggering a cascade through the limbic system that primes the body for avoidance. Heart rate slows, mental clarity narrows, and instead of stepping forward, you scroll, you delay, you escape into distraction. And with every repetition of that behavior, the circuit gets stronger, not metaphorically, literally. The neural pathways associated with avoidance are reinforced. The brain begins to associate discomfort with danger, and in doing so, it programs procrastination as the default operating system. This is how identity starts to break, because as you delay what matters, shame creeps in. You begin to mistake biology for weakness. You believe the voice that says you're lazy or undisciplined, but it's not moral failure, it's misfiring pattern recognition. Your system isn't broken, it's doing exactly what it's been trained to do. It's protecting you based on faulty prediction models. And until you correct that prediction, until you interrupt that loop, you will stay trapped in the rhythm of avoidance, unable to access the deep reservoirs of focus and drive that already exist within you. But here is the power that few understand. The same neuroplasticity that builds hesitation can be used to break it. The brain is not fixed. It responds to demand. It responds to challenge. It rewires in response to pressure. When you step into the task instead of away from it, even if it's just 5 seconds sooner than you normally would, you begin to rewrite the fear association. You send a new message to the amygdala, to the insular cortex, to every area that once lit up in warning. This is not danger, this is growth. This is not threat, this is training, and every time you choose to act in the face of resistance, that message gets louder. The circuits begin to shift, the protective reflex dissolves, and the warrior circuitry, once dormant, starts to activate. You're not fighting yourself, you're retraining the system, you're converting fear into fuel, you're proving that the signal of discomfort is not a stop sign, it is a starting line. Avoidance strengthens neural circuits for hesitation through negative reinforcement, and the more often you delay action in response to discomfort, the more your brain learns to protect you from that discomfort by avoiding it altogether. This is not abstract, it's a physical process. Neurons that fire together wire together, and every time you choose to scroll instead of start, walk away instead of engage, or overthink instead of act, you are reinforcing a real biological loop. That loop becomes faster, more automatic, more dominant with each repetition. The brain is not judging you. It is not punishing you. It is simply doing what it's designed to do in code efficiency. If hesitation is what you practice, hesitation is what you will master. The reinforcement is subtle but powerful. When you put off the hard task, when you delay the uncomfortable step, you often feel a slight relief. Your anxiety dips, your mind calms. That relief is a chemical signal, and the brain logs it as reward. It says, avoiding this brought peace, even if that peace is temporary and ultimately destructive. That is the essence of negative reinforcement. Removing the discomfort becomes the reward, and like all rewards, it teaches the brain what to repeat. In this way, procrastination becomes addictive, not because it feels good, but because it feels better than the fear of effort. Not because it solves anything, but because it momentarily soothes the discomfort of doing something difficult. This is how people find themselves stuck for years. The habit of avoidance is not passive, it's an active, learned neural architecture. The basal ganglia, the structure responsible for habit formation, records every cue, every trigger, every escape route. Over time, the brain gets so efficient at dodging discomfort that it can derail action before you're even aware you're making the choice. A notification appears, a new tab opens, a rationalization whispers, "I'll start tomorrow." And your system obeys not because you lack will, but because the pathway of escape is smoother, more familiar, and chemically more rewarding in the short term. But this can be reversed. The nervous system is plastic. It adapts based on usage. Just as avoidance becomes automatic through repetition, action can become instinctive the same way. But the process is uncomfortable because it means leaning into the very sensation you've trained yourself to flee. It means breaking the pattern in real time, facing the spike in discomfort without retreating. And when you do that, when you interrupt the loop, even once, you weaken it. You teach your brain a new rule: discomfort is not danger, and escape is not the answer. That is the beginning of change, not from willpower alone, but from rewiring. Not from shame, but from understanding the mechanism and deliberately choosing to build a new one. The strength you seek is already there, but the access point is buried under layers of learned avoidance. The work is to unlearn it by stepping into it again and again until resistance becomes readiness. Until fear becomes fire, the brain confuses discomfort with danger, triggering delay to preserve energy and avoid pain, even when the task in front of you poses no real threat. This confusion happens because your nervous system is wired to keep you alive, not to make you successful, not to keep you productive, not to help you grow. When you approach something uncertain, effortful, or emotionally risky, your limbic system, especially the amygdala, activates as if you're walking into a battlefield. It sends signals of unease, tension, anxiety, and instead of interpreting that as a cue to rise, most people interpret it as a cue to retreat. The brain says, "This feels hard," and the body says, "Step back." But what's actually happening is a misfire, a survival reflex applied to a situation that only requires courage, not combat. This is the biological origin of procrastination. It's not a mindset problem. It's not about being disorganized or unmotivated. It's about misclassification. Your system is classifying the discomfort of effort the same way it would classify physical danger. So it deploys the ancient mechanisms of delay, withdrawal, and freezing to conserve resources. These mechanisms are millions of years old and deeply embedded in your physiology. They served our ancestors when the threats were lions and starvation. Today, the threats are deadlines and self, doubt, but the system doesn't know the difference. It just knows tension, and it pulls you away from it. But here's the cost. When you obey that signal without questioning it, you reinforce the false association. Your brain logs the avoidance as safety, and it wires that response even deeper. Soon, the discomfort of growth is coded the same way as danger. You flinch at your own potential. You pull back not because you can't, but because your system believes doing so keeps you safe. This is how hesitation becomes habit, and habit becomes identity, and it all starts with one confused signal, a signal that you can learn to override. To break this loop, you don't wait for the signal to disappear. You don't wait to feel safe. You lean in with awareness. You tell your system, this is not danger, this is development. This is not threat, this is training. That reframe is not just mental, it's biological. When you move toward the task despite the tension, you send new signals to the brain. Effort is not to be avoided. It is to be embraced. That shift begins to rewire the amygdala's response. The brain stops panicking at pressure. The circuits of focus and action begin to light up. And your system starts to transform, no longer a servant of comfort, but a weapon of will. This is how the biology of fear is transformed into the biology of forward motion. You don't eliminate discomfort, you redefine it. You don't escape tension, you channel it, because the feeling you fear is not proof of danger. It is the signal of opportunity. And when you stop running from it, you discover the part of you that was built to rise. Action, even in small doses, shifts neurochemistry from paralysis to pursuit. The nervous system is not waiting for motivation, it's waiting for movement. And once that movement begins, a cascade of biological signals fire to say, we're no longer avoiding, we're now engaging. That engagement recruits the brain's core systems of drive. Dopaminergic neurons begin to pulse into the striatum, norepinephrine levels rise to increase alertness, and the prefrontal cortex gains more control over emotional reactivity. All of this begins not with thought, not with inspiration, but with motion. A single step taken in defiance of hesitation is enough to flip the switch from dormant to driven. This is how you take control of a system that would otherwise keep you stuck. The brain is not passively waiting for perfect emotional conditions. It's actively responding to your behavior. When you act even for 5 minutes, even for 1 rep, you deliver a clear biological signal. Threat is not present, energy is being invested, momentum is now in play. This input triggers internal feedback loops, creating a chemical signature that supports continued action. Dopamine doesn't just reward completion, it fuels continuation. It rewards pursuit, and that reward builds upon itself with every step forward, no matter how small. The trap most people fall into is believing they need to feel ready before they begin. But readiness is the reward, not the requirement. The circuits that produce clarity, confidence, and commitment are downstream of the action itself. You don't think your way into drive, you act your way into it. The breath deepens, the gaze sharpens, the body aligns, the mind follows, and once that alignment occurs, the internal state begins to change. The same task that once felt overwhelming begins to feel possible. The same resistance that once felt paralyzing begins to feel like pressure you can move through. That shift is neurochemical. It's structural, and it's earned through initiation. When you remain still, your system defaults to conservation. It treats energy as a precious resource to be hoarded. But when you start moving, especially in the face of discomfort, you give your brain permission to unlock the energy reserves it was holding back. These reserves are real. They live in your biology, and the key to accessing them is motion, not planning. Not perfect strategy, movement, because movement is measurable, and the brain responds to what it can measure. It needs a threshold of engagement to justify releasing the chemicals of effort. Once you cross that threshold, the system adapts. The most powerful shift you can make is to act in the presence of resistance, not in the absence of it. Because resistance is the signal that action will have the greatest biological payoff, that's when the dopaminergic system engages with the deepest intensity. That's when neuroplasticity is at its peak. That's when the nervous system begins to rewire not just your habits, but your identity. You become someone who moves in the face of internal tension, someone who no longer waits for a feeling to start, but creates the feeling by starting. Someone who takes back control of the system, one action at a time. Using visual anchoring, breathwork, and timed focus can override the limbic system, allowing the prefrontal cortex, the command center of deliberate action, to reclaim control from emotional reactivity and delay. Your eyes are not just passive observers. They are part of your central nervous system. The way you use your gaze directly impacts your state. When you narrow your visual focus, what's called convergent vision, you signal to your brain that it's time to engage. This subtle but powerful act recruits the systems of alertness and readiness. It shifts your brain from a default mode of scanning and dreaming into one of precision and targeting. It tells the system, the mission has begun. Pair that with intentional breath work, and you now have a gateway into the autonomic nervous system. When you inhale, especially forcefully, you activate the sympathetic branch, the part of your nervous system designed for mobilization and effort. When you extend your exhale, you trigger the parasympathetic response, the brake, the calm, the regulator. But when you balance them deliberately, through controlled breath cycles like the physiological sigh or box breathing, you stabilize internal chaos. You take control of your arousal state. You bring the system out of panic, out of overwhelm, and into a window where cognition can operate again. That's when the fog begins to clear, not by thinking, but by breathing with intent. Now layer on time-restricted focus. This is not about sitting still for hours. It's about creating a container for intensity. When you tell the brain this will be 10 minutes of effort, you lower the perceived threat. You make the task finite. You reduce psychological resistance. And more importantly, you give your dopaminergic system a target. You assign an endpoint, which makes the pursuit itself more rewarding. Inside that 10 minutes, with your vision anchored, your breath regulated, and your time limited, you activate a neurological trifecta: focus, engagement, and completion. The circuits of action begin to dominate the circuits of delay. These tools are not hacks, they are levers. Levers that control real biological mechanisms, and when you use them together, you take what once felt impossible starting, sustaining, finishing, and reduce it to physiology. You no longer depend on motivation. You no longer wait for clarity. You no longer let emotion dictate motion. Instead, you use the body to command the brain. You use behavior to reshape biology, and in doing so, you make action inevitable. Not because the resistance disappears, but because you've learned how to rise above it using the very systems the brain was built with. You don't overcome procrastination by hoping for better days. You overcome it by manipulating internal state in real time, by stepping into the cockpit and flipping the switches yourself, with your eyes, with your breath, with your time. Not randomly, but with precision. And when that precision becomes ritual, your system stops resisting action and starts expecting it. You become someone the brain no longer tries to protect from discomfort, because the discomfort has become your trigger for domination. You destroy procrastination by building reflexive initiation, not by waiting for motivation. The brain must be trained to respond to discomfort not with hesitation, but with motion. And that training only happens through repetition, deliberate, disciplined, high-friction repetition. You are not born with reflexive action. You build it rep by rep until the act of starting becomes instinctive. When the task appears, you don't think, you move. When the resistance rises, you don't debate, you lean in. That is the product of rewired circuitry, not willpower alone. The brain stops seeking permission and starts executing pattern. Initiation must become your identity, not something you do, but something you are. This doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from micro, decisions made again and again under pressure. You don't need to win the war in a day. You need to win the next 5 seconds. That's where reflex is born, in the space between resistance and response. Every time you override the internal urge to delay, even once, you are forming a neural vote for the version of you that acts. And the brain records every vote. It doesn't care how small, it cares how consistent. There is a cost to hesitation, a real biological cost. Every pause, every delay, every surrender to the comfort impulse trains the system to stall, and the longer you wait, the stronger the pattern becomes. But there's a reversal point. The exact moment you act in the face of resistance, the system shifts. Dopamine begins to pulse, the prefrontal cortex lights up, and the neural networks associated with action begin to dominate those of avoidance. You feel it, not as a wave of motivation, but as internal momentum. That momentum is fragile at first, but it grows with repetition. It grows when you commit to being the person who moves without needing to feel ready. That commitment rewires your perception of resistance. What once felt like a wall becomes a signal. What once triggered doubt now signals domination. The brain adapts not by force, but by frequency. Repetition under pressure builds speed, and speed creates inevitability. You no longer wonder whether you'll act, you just do. That's the power of reflexive initiation. It is not thought. It is not motivation. It is a nervous system trained to recognize challenge and respond automatically with effort. This is the highest level of discipline, not a battle, but a baseline. The absence of internal debate. The absence of delay. You build it by starting ugly, by starting tired, by starting scared, and by doing that so many times that your biology adapts to expect action instead of escape. Procrastination doesn't survive in a brain trained to move. It dies in the face of momentum that no longer asks for comfort or permission. It dies in the presence of a system that obeys purpose over feeling, repetition over resistance, and identity over impulse.